Remember, you can get in touch with our Fearsome Foursome by emailing clubdubpodcast@mail.com and through Twitter, using the hashtag @clubdubpodcast.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Hi, it's me, US Computer Voice 6. As Rob forgot to record an intro this week, I'm here to tell you this episode is all about nearly moments and near misses in NFL history. Pretty great, huh? So sit back, relax and enjoy.
So hi gents. Hello Rob.
Hi.
So I'm going to carry on.
I'm sorry, I was laughing.
For people in the world of listening, you are not going to be aware how many attempts we have had at opening our pod, and that's probably as good as it's going to get. So let's keep going. The reason for this giddy excitement is that we were preparing for all of you a super special podcast where for the first time in the history of the Club Dub Football Podcast, we were all going to be together in a room. Now, 3 of us are. Apologies for the poor sound quality and just general lack of attention to detail. But Aldrin, would you like to tell the listening world how our plans have been derailed this week?
Well, thanks to COVID, once again, my plans for coming and visiting you guys have been stifled. So postponed and not cancelled. So that's all.
So as we are postponing and not cancelling our super pod in each other's company, we've decided to keep ourselves ticking over this week with a mini pod of sorts before we get to our altogether extravaganza in a couple of weeks' time. So generally speaking, our topic today is the near misses you would change, those little foibles, those key moments in NFL history that we're going to turn on their head for our own conversation and amusement. As it's a mini pod, we're going to disappoint listenership immediately by saying no Phil's Quiz of the Week this week.
No Quiz of the Week, you are joking, it is the best bit of the pod.
Difficult when we're all sharing a computer and Phil just can't Google general trivia, I suppose, is part of the reason. But we're just going to chat, not accurate. But we're just going to jibber jabber about all the wonderful things that we would change about the NFL and then find our way back to normal programming in 7 days' time. So there's a bit of NFL news to get to, but let's round that out at the end, which means, look, you may be far away, Aldrin, but why not kick us off? Your near miss from NFL history, and we'll chip in as and when you've rounded your point out. 3, 2, 1, go.
So my one, I am denied because there was a few in my head, but the one that I went with is what can only be summed up as the tackle. And this is from Super Bowl 34, the Rams against the Tennessee Titans in a game where neither team had won the Super Bowl before. So it was a big game, everything on the line. And it was the season that Kurt Warner was named regular season MVP, had an absolutely storming year, led the Rams to the Super Bowl final and put on an absolute show, really. Led the Titans in total offensive yards in the first half, 294 to 89. So they were absolutely crushing the Titans. And then all of a sudden in the second half, the game turned on its head and Tennessee responded, scoring 16 consecutive points unanswered. They erased a massive deficit, which just hadn't been done in a Super Bowl before. And then it kind of swung back again in the Rams' favor. Kurt Warner completed a 73-yard touchdown pass to Isaac Bruce, and they regained the lead. But then immediately, Titans drove back down to the 10-yard line, 6 seconds remaining in the game. On the final play, a pass to Kevin Dyson, and Rams linebacker Mike Jones tackled him at the 1 yard line, arms outstretched, reaching for the line, but just fell short. And I think for me, that is the biggest near miss that I could think of, because it was so close to being an absolute turnaround. And yet the tackle just rendered that that Tennessee comeback mute. And then Kurt Warner went on to be the Super Bowl MVP, 414 passing yards without an interception, and just an amazing game. So I think it's one of those that it's so easy to forget that last pivotal moment, just because of how you think of those scenes of, you know, Kurt Warner winning the Super Bowl, Dick Vermeer winning, you know, his Super Bowl, and then kind of going off into the sunset and retiring, albeit for a brief time. But for me, that pivotal moment of, it comes down to inches, and so often it does in the NFL, but that's such a nearly moment, what they could have done in turning that game around, and just fell short. So I don't know that I would change it. I think it's kind of perfect as it is, but yeah, that's the nearly moment for me.
Maybe not perfect for Titans fans, but as we were talking about earlier, was it the last Super Bowl with two teams competing who'd never won the title before, never walked away with the Lombardi? And the incredible thing for me about that moment is when and I'm guessing it must be the America's game that I've heard these comments on, but when you watch the America's game and the Rams players are talking, they talk so much about how Steve McNair was just so fast that night. And towards the end of the game, every defensive player was just looking at the ball every time it was snapped to McNair, just praying he didn't run. And there's that moment where, I suppose you'll never know, and as great a kind of tackle as it was, and as an amazing a piece of, you know, sporting drama it was, there is that element where you look back and you think he had so much space, he had so much time, you know, in terms of players around him and space on the field. I mean, 6 seconds on the clock doesn't feel like a lot of time, but you do wonder what that would have done for, to be fair, the already quite large folklore and following around Steve McNair, if he'd have had that kind of moment, you know, to win the Super Bowl as time expires, you know, ball in hand as a superstar quarterback. It would have, you know, delivered a very different but equally dramatic story, I suppose. And like I said, the Rams have been around and been competitive since. The Titans are probably only just starting to recover really from that, aren't they? It's probably only the last few seasons, you know, in probably the last 15, you could imagine, that they're really feeling like they go into the year with any opportunity to get back to the big game again. So I love it, Aldrin. Cracking shout.
I think if the touchdown happens, you know, if they get the extra yard, you're looking at Kurt Warner as a Hall of Famer that's never goes on to win a Super Bowl. You know, he didn't win another Super Bowl. He obviously came close with the Cardinals, but we don't want to bring that up in punching distance of Rob. So, you know, it kind of almost changes the course of NFL history. You know, does Kurt Warner still get in the Hall of Fame if he doesn't win that Super Bowl? So, you know, it's inches, isn't it, that can change history. And I think this is a good example of that.
Do you know the weird thing? Sorry, and I'm cutting in when it's really JB's turn. But actually, the weird thing for me about Kurt Warner and the Hall of Fame is I don't think Warner gets into the Hall of Fame without that stint with the Cardinals. You know, he kind of came to the Cardinals maybe not imagining he would be the franchise quarterback. I mean, Matt Leinart was very much, you know, drafted 7, was a superstar in college. And Warner's career had faltered a little bit. I mean, the Rams moved on to Bolger, the Giants. It never really worked out for Warner the way I think people imagined. But, you know, you've got Eli Manning performing at a high level to kind of account for that possibly. But I think if Warner even only wins the one Super Bowl, doesn't have that late kind of career renaissance, maybe that's another near miss we could have been talking about. As a Cardinals fan, you're thrilled to see him in the Hall. But yeah, without it, do people maybe look at him the same way?
So I think that's a really good point about Super Bowls and about the impact that it has on your career. Because I kind of agree that looking at Kurt Warner's career, like I think multiple regular season MVPs, I think he has the stats and the career performance to get into the Hall of Fame. It's that one Super Bowl win versus those 3 overall performances that really push him over the edge. And for me, the most interesting thing when you look at the tackle, when you look at those yards and how close they were, it's not just about a Super Bowl for Kurt Warner or Dick Vermeil finally getting a Super Bowl. For me, it's the coach on the other side of the field. It's the Titans coach, and it's Jeff Fisher. Now, Jeff Fisher has kind of become, and I think I said this recently, maybe even as much as last week, he's synonymous with like 7 and 9. He's that Rams teams that were always the nearly there and nearly there and nearly there, and then he ran out of rope. If that tackle doesn't happen and the Titans get that touchdown, and all of a sudden Jeff Fisher is now a Super Bowl winning quarterback, where do they go from there? Head coach, Super Bowl winning head coach. Where does his career go from there? What does that change about everything? And do we look at Jeff Fisher now as potentially a head coach that maybe deserves another opportunity? I mean, not on the parallel of like an Andy Reid. I think with Andy Reid, it was a fantastic head coach who you looked at never having won a Super Bowl and thinking, well, hang on a minute, that's missing. That there is a gap there that we know is going to have a Lombardi trophy put in it.
Yeah.
And then they won one. And now you look at, okay, that's essentially like Andy Reid's career. Yeah, completed it, mate. With Jeff Fisher now potentially having one as well, where would he sit?
Well, maybe you start to do this. I mean, if you use the Super Bowl as the measure and how transformative a Super Bowl win can be, I mean, obviously the Cardinals, you got Ken Whisenhunt, that ultimately, made that one Super Bowl and never really hit the heights again. I mean, he had a good run of 3 or 4 seasons, I suppose, with the Cardinals overall. But I mean, the one that jumps out when you talk about players who could have their legacy transformed by a Super Bowl win, you probably think Colin Kaepernick. I mean, Colin Kaepernick in that Super Bowl against the Ravens, I mean, it was a weird one because a bit like you're describing with the Rams-Titans, Aldrin, it was one of those Ravens run out to a lead, 49ers start to claw back after the lights came back on, famously, wasn't it, after that power cut or power outage. And you know what, I think the Colin Kaepernick story is one best told on places other than a podcast like ours. I think there are people, who will tell that story and will look at it in ways that we may never think to or want to. But I do think, imagine how transformative that would be. Imagine the argument of Kaepernick not getting another shot if he had a Super Bowl ring from his time with the 49ers. But yeah, as near misses go, I will say, Aldrin, I'm kind of with you. We did a pod a few months back, didn't we, about pieces of history we'd change. And actually, for me, that near miss is just perfect, just the way it is. Warner goes from shelf stacker to quarterback to Super Bowl champion, that amazing narrative for him. And the Rams, truly do get to be the greatest show on turf. So, I love it. Aldrin, thank you for kicking us off. I think we've got a tick against our first. So of the two of you who are primed with your near misses, who wants to go next? PB?
Yeah, I'll go next. Normally me third, isn't it? So I will take you back to 2007. Oakland Raiders on the clock with the number 1 pick of the NFL draft, and they select Jamarcus Russell. Now, he's a favorite of NFL fans for the many stories of him watching drills and plays that he needs to learn and actually being sent blank tapes with nothing on. And he'd come back and say that he'd watched it all through. So, he's in NFL folklore. I think he always will be. But I think as a nearly moment, as an almost moment, it's a tale of, what the Raiders could have had. If you get a generational talent, a future Hall of Famer, Patrick Willis, Darrelle Revis, Marshall Yanda, in the first round itself, for example, Calvin Johnson, Megatron, they could have had him, Joe Thomas, an Iron Man for the Cleveland Browns, Adrian Peterson, one of the best running backs of the last kind of 10 or 20 years. And then, of course, Marshawn Lynch as well, who ended up playing for the Raiders at the tail end of his career. He would have been, I think, a hometown selection, probably would have won a lot of favor with the fan base as well. So, I think Jamarcus Russell will go down as the biggest bust of all time in the NFL draft. And I think, if you look back at what they could have had, they could have taken a player that could have changed the course of that franchise, So for me, that's one that really sticks out. I nearly went, we've talked enough about the Bears and some of their woes on previous podcasts, and I looked at the Trubisky drafting, and obviously they passed up to Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes, and I think they were strong contenders here. But yeah, for me, Jamarcus Russell and just what they could have had instead, from any number of options was, is really one that stuck out.
I always love these kind of topics, and giving everyone a peek behind the curtain, I think this was my suggestion again this week for something that we could do. And I think just because I love the idea of the NFL's equivalent of Jim Bowen, sorry, international listeners, coming in and just saying, let's have a look at what you could have won. You've got a speedboat in Jamarcus Russell, or you could have won a transformational talent for your franchise, like a Marshawn Lynch or something like that. And I think coming out of college, there was chatter about Russell having that kind of attitude, being a little bit lazy, perhaps not taking everything as serious as you would want your franchise quarterback to be. And I think, the Raiders are probably still suffering from that. I think we've talked about opinions and standings of Derek Carr, and some people will say, no, they have their quarterback. Others will say, well, no, there's an upgrade or something from there. The difficulty with the draft at the time is always you're never entirely sure what you're going to get, because the Raiders could just as easily have taken Joe Thomas, and he may have been injured 3 games into his career and just never recovered from it. You can't look at someone's career and definitely say, oh yeah, it would have gone exactly the same. But it does open up that kind of thing to just, well, what would a change have made? Because like the Raiders haven't been to the Super Bowl since they lost to the Buccaneers in 2002, and have never really looked like they're going to do it again. And part of it comes down to those kind of draft decisions. And the Raiders generally always make weird draft choices anyway. The Davis family have their idea of what a Raiders player is and what they want to get, and they're going to go out and get that person, regardless of whether people think they're a first-round pick or a seventh-round pick that you've still taken in the first round.
I think it shows the danger of fixating on one position as well. People talk about drafting for team needs versus going for best player available. And just looking through the draft class, I think, the best quarterback to come out of that draft class is arguably Drew Stanton. So, they're fixated. They need their quarterback of the future. But I don't think that guy existed in that draft. So, that shows you the danger. And when you're evaluating, we need to, we're first on the board, we need to get our quarterback. Well, actually, you'd have been far better off going for one of these other skill positions than kind of putting all your eggs in that basket.
Well, see, my point on this is, in any other sport, I'd agree with you. The problem with the NFL is the quarterback is by far the most important position on a team. So if you're statistically the worst team in the NFL, you need a quarterback, right? You absolutely do. Other than the seasons where you had, Peyton Manning injured all year. I know they ended up trading him away, but they could have had Peyton Manning back and recovered potentially rather than going Andrew Luck in Indianapolis. But the thing about Russell that makes him so incredible is it's not incredible to pick really high or first overall and have a quarterback not work out. But I mean, there's not working out, there's not working out. Jameis Winston didn't work out. Jamarcus Russell, not only was run out of town, he never got another chance. I mean, there were other players like, I suppose, Vince Young, actually talking about the Titans a few moments ago. Vince Young was seen as the next McNair, the next kind of superstar quarterback in Tennessee. And that didn't work out. But I mean, Jamarcus Russell was just a complete waste of a pick. And when you think about what the first overall pick means, it has a certain status, doesn't it? And a certain mystique that if you follow a sport that doesn't have the draft, you don't maybe quite understand really. And I remember Troy Aikman saying he realized the moment the Cowboys picked him, that when you pick a quarterback first overall, it's because you believe they can win your team a Super Bowl. And you're like, okay. And then being a Cardinals fan a few years ago, I mean, Steve Keim is, I think, an above average GM. I think I've loved and loathed some of the things he's done as a fan over the years. But one of the things he said that I really liked is when everyone was like, are you excited to have the first overall pick? He said, I'm not excited. It's an embarrassment. But what you have to do is you have to say, this is where we are. and we've now got the best chance we could have to never be back here again. You know, you pick first overall, you get to pick the best player out of college, and you've got to make sure you were never in this position again. And like you said, the Raiders have been. You know, the Raiders have come back to this well many, many times trying to solve problems. But Jamarcus Russell, I mean, I don't know, giving a guy a blank tape and then him coming back pretending he's watched those blitz packages, you've got to think, why do you give him a blank tape? You know, there was obviously problems.
Yeah,
it's not like you're doing that just as a, here's one, I think we should try. You know, this is clearly a guy who was not only a failure, but a distraction, a locker room problem. I mean, it really is, like you say, you could talk Ryan Leaf, you could talk a myriad of quarterbacks who didn't quite work out going high, but he is the one, isn't he? He's the cautionary tale for any team drafting one overall.
I think the thing for me is I was just having a quick look at that draft because I remember there was something funky about it and reading it. So former Raiders linebacker, who was then the Detroit Lions GM, Matt Millen, said that he warned Al Davis not to draft Russell after during a pre-draft interview with him, the guy didn't pay attention and Millen kicked him out of the pre-draft interview and said, well, if you're not going to take it seriously, off you go. And kind of told Al Davis not to draft him. I think the biggest thing for me that really kind of speaks to the dysfunction at the Raiders and goes to that nearly moment of what they could have had in his place is that the coach at the time, Lane Kiffin, didn't want Russell and asked Davis not to draft him. He wanted Calvin Johnson. And Al Davis kind of went ahead despite all of these red flags. And like you say, Rob, it's one thing if you pick a high character guy that's done brilliantly in college and for whatever reason, it just doesn't click in the NFL and they don't come off perfect. They're not that Super Bowl winner like you draft a quarterback number one to be. But then there's a guy that has all of these red flags about coaches not wanting him, other GMs saying the guy doesn't even pay attention in an interview for his job, let alone when things get serious. And then all of a sudden it turns out that, yeah, the guy doesn't pay attention. He's not really that dedicated to the game. He's not going to take it seriously. And you end up with, well, Jamarcus Russell is the end of it. But yeah, looking down that list of what you could have won, you know, Calvin Johnson, Joe Thomas, Darrell Revis, Adrian Peterson, like there's so, I know we say that it's not an exact science and it might have turned out differently for those guys at different organizations, but you think all of those other guys are high IQ, hard workers, guys that want to be involved in their organizations and prove that they wanted to be at the very top of their game. And I think when you take Jamarcus Russell, number one, you never get that sense, do you? You never think that he's the hardworking leader that wants to better himself. He's just, he just never seemed interested.
Yeah, kind of going back to something that Rob said a little bit there. If you think Jamarcus Russell is the solution to your problems, you have much bigger problems than you're aware of. And to not to pick on Rob's favorite team, but the Cardinals are a prime example, I think, of some of the things we're talking about. They took Josh Rosen as their first round pick with Steve Wilkes as the head coach. And it just didn't work out. And then the next year you've got Cliff Kingsbury in, new head coach, wants to do new things. And what do? You take Kyler Murray. And this time it works out. You, as a franchise, kind of like Rob said, you have to be on the lookout for your quarterback. And if you don't get it one year, then you go back and you get it the next year. And you do have to a degree, keep trying to make sure you get that right. But I think we're all in agreement of there are levels of getting it wrong. And Jamarcus Russell is the level of getting it wrong that you never want to do. Because like we said, it can just set everything back so much. It's not, we talk about like positive and negative influences. Jamarcus Russell is still a negative impact on the now Las Vegas Raiders because they're still suffering from, what was it, 13, 14 years ago?
14.
It feels remarkable. I mean, he is just the standard, isn't he? You can imagine that he's not going to be the last, and maybe first overall, but every high pick at quarterback that doesn't work out is forever going to be compared to him. And do you know what? The incredible thing is we are talking about a still young man. He would be the youngest person in this room, possibly. What's he now? 34, 35, maybe something like that, even as we speak. And the Raiders paid him $40 million. I mean, there is failing, and there is failing. So many people to blame, so little time. So, loving Jamarcus Russell as our second. Miss JB, round out our mini pod with yours, sir.
So my miss, I think, is the miss to a certain franchise, and it is Scott Norwood going wide right. Apologies to the Buffalo Bills fans for what we're about to talk about, because I think that miss wasn't just about the Bills not winning that Super Bowl against the Giants. It was about setting, unfortunately, the trend for the Bills going to the next 3 Super Bowls as well and coming away with 0 Lombardis, going up against a Joe Gibbs-led Washington Redskins, as they were then, team that didn't necessarily have the same kind of star power and impact that the Bills had with Jim Kelly and Thurman Thomas.
Andre Reed.
Yeah, but just had the right pieces, the right people doing the right things at the right time. Kind of that prototype potentially for that Bill Belichick, just do your job philosophy. That's what they were doing. And then they go back the next 2 years and crash headlong into Jimmy Johnson's Dallas Cowboys, led by Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, and Michael Irvin. And if you're an NFL team in the 90s, that's not the team that you want to go up against in any way. And you have to feel for the Buffalo Bills and the Buffalo Bills fans and everything for it, because to be the only team in NFL history to go to 4 straight Super Bowls and come away with nothing, and doing it in those ways, it's that crushing missed kick. We saw it, a couple of years ago, was it with the Bears and the double doink? And just how heartbreaking that can be for a franchise.
Well, and a player as well. I mean, Cody Parkey got ran out of town, didn't he?
Just when we were talking about what we were going to say, Rob made reference to the Buffalo 66. And I thinking about it, I watched an ESPN, I think 30 for 30 that they did about the 4 Falls of Buffalo is what it was called. And seeing Scott Norwood at kind of the pep rally that the Bills did after it. And you can see that this is a guy who is broken into so many pieces. He is absolutely crushed and destroyed. And the Bills fans are being so lovely. They're being so supportive. They are cheering for him. And he's like, we are going to go back. We'll get one. We will do this for you. And they didn't.
But there's a huge amount of credit. I mean, firstly, you said about the Buffalo Bills fans and the pain they went through. I don't think us talking about it's going to be the worst thing that happens to them. I mean, I think many of them lived through it. But there's this thing about they brushed themselves off and they went again. You know, Jim Kelly, I mean, the funny thing about Jim Kelly, and obviously his amazing struggles in recent years, you know, ultimately that guy is still considered a hero in Buffalo. You know, those fans still look back on that team incredibly fondly, a team that entertained, a team that were, you know, as good really, like you say, as any team in the 90s. I mean, they were, of the 4 Super Bowls, you've got to say they were well beaten, certainly lost to the better team, I would say, in 3 of those. And it is that one that you look back on and think that's the one really that hurts, you know, the one really that smarts. But I love the way that fan bases work like that. You know, you look to fan bases like Green Bay and the way they're now back to embracing Brett Favre. You know, you look at what time and what history can do, you know, and how fans look back on those moments. I think Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, Andre Reed, I mean, you go through that team, there really was some superstars. And I think they are at least credited for what they did as much as what they didn't do. And I think, You know, you take the Norwoods, the Kelly, they came back again and again and again. And I think we've seen teams who have had devastating Super Bowl moments never recover. You know, those groups of players never gather themselves again. Free agents move on, and before you know it, you know, they're no longer a competitive operation. I think the Bills, to have that run, it's not the type of history they maybe wanted to write, but it's still the type of history you can be proud of all the same.
But it kind of did end Norwood's career because they almost immediately tried looking for another kicker. They brought someone in, I can't, name escapes me now, but they brought someone else in who ultimately didn't win the job, and they kept Norwood on for the next season, and he kicked in the second Super Bowl, and he actually was perfect in the postseason that year. But then they binned him off for the next season. You know, he never recovered. He played one more season in the NFL, that second season, and then that was it. So, you know, the Bills may have then gone on to make another 2 Super Bowls after that, but it kind of finished Norwood's career. And he was almost in a position where it was an unwinnable position almost, because his average, I think, was 47, 48 yards, which is, you know, quite short for a kicker. So he was already at the length, you know, of his max of that season. So it's not like this was a 20-yard kick that he should have made or should have definitely made. You know, he'd make 9 times out of 10 or 9.5 times out of 10. You know, this was a kick at the very edge of his range. And you almost think, with 8 seconds left on the clock, was there not another play they could have made to you know, try and get a little bit more distance, or, you know, bring it a little bit further and make it a higher percentage play for him. So, you know, you talk about almost moments and moments that ruin careers, and ultimately that ended up being it for Norwood.
I think that's it, isn't it? You know, 47 yards in a Super Bowl, 8 seconds left on the clock. It's not a chip shot. You know, there's a lot in that. So I think you're right, Phil. I think his longest that year was 48, and it was a 47-yard attempt. You know, that's some serious pressure on a guy to try and make a kick that he's not really going to be comfortable at. Like you say, I mean, can you try another play? 8 seconds doesn't really give you that, I don't think. You probably kind of forced your hand really with it, and you've got to try and make it. But yeah, I mean, 47 yards is always going to be a tough one to make. But equally, it's that it does go back to that nearly moment. You know, if that sneaks left a little bit and it goes through the uprights, then the guy's a hero. And whether or not he comes back for the next year or he gets binned off in a year and a half's time, who cares? The guy has a Lombardi. So I do think that is almost the epitome of that nearly moment, because a few inches to the left, a little bit to the left, and the guy's a hero. As it goes out, the guy is, he's not great at kicking distance shots, and, you know, he's getting binned off in a year's time. So that is really a nearly moment for me.
I think, sort of going back to the point around how long his career lasted and the longevity of kickers in general, I think it's that fourth Super Bowl for the Bills, the second for the Cowboys, the America's game for that. Jimmy Johnson tells a story of his kicker missing in one game, coming off the field, and sort of Jimmy Johnson saying, well, what's wrong? And the kicker says, I don't know, coach. I think my confidence is just a bit shot. And Jimmy Johnson says, well, that's all I needed here. I cut him the next day and went and got myself another kicker. Because ultimately, for as critical as some of their performances can be, hello, Adam Vinatieri, kickers are the most expendable position in the NFL, because you'd always just look and think, we can go and get another one. I think going to kind of what we've closed out with for each of these points, would you change it? There is a part of me that I think would, because I would always like for a fan base to have that joy, to have that feeling of winning a Lombardi. It was what made the Eagles beating the Patriots a couple of years ago so much better, because this was a fan base finally getting that moment that they've wanted for so long. But there is another part of me that kind of thinks, well, hang on, without those 4 losses, without tying it back to the team we were talking about at the very beginning, without the Music City Miracle and going out to that crazy play in the Titans, would the game where the Bengals beat the Ravens, wasn't it? And the Bills had beaten the Dolphins, and the Bills fans were watching it in Dolphin Stadium. If the Bengals didn't win that game and the Bills didn't have that just explosion of joy, when they finally get back into the playoffs. And then sort of the past season just gone with Josh Allen making his improvement and the Bills being arguably one of the best teams in the AFC at least. You kind of look at it and think, well, maybe it's going to balance out. Maybe this is all just going to come back around. And now we're going to be looking at a Bills team that are going to go to the Super Bowl. And because of what's happened previously, this time it's going to happen for them.
There's 2 points I'll make. The first one is to just back up yours. If the conversation would have come to me next, I would have said exactly the same. Phil's point is a good point, but the Scott Norwood example is for any kicker ever. I mean, kickers are just wildly expendable. The other thing I suppose I wanted to make a point on is it does bring home one of the most frustrating things about the NFL for me as a watching fan when you watch the Super Bowl. Because every time you watch the Super Bowl, and this happens year in, year out, right, the losing team, right, the commentator will say something like, they came so close. It wasn't for them this year, but they're a young team. They're hungry. They'll be back. You do not know that in the NFL. Every year when that is said, and it is said absolutely perennially, I listen to that and think those are shallow, if not hollow words. I mean, how many teams come back, really? The Bills came back. The Bills came back year after year. They had some absolute Hall of Fame talent on that roster. And I think, if they win one, I don't know, do they? It's maybe not a record you'd want in a lot of ways, but all of a sudden the Bills story just isn't as standout. It isn't as interesting, isn't as kind of heartbreaking, I suppose. I will say this, if we were to play a quick game of over-under, Josh Allen stays upright long enough to have another 10, 12 years in this league. Does he win a Super Bowl in Buffalo? I'm 80, 90% he does.
Yeah, I think so.
I think good coaching setup, good team around him, an AFC where, there are some real heavyweight talents there like the Chiefs, and we all seem to be quite big on the Chargers, although quite whether they'll live up to that hype, probably be the first time the Chargers have ever lived up to the hype, if they do, to be fair. But yeah, I think Josh Allen's got a Super Bowl in him. I think this Buffalo unit has got a Super Bowl in them. And yeah, does that dispel years of hurt? I don't know. There's plenty of franchises with hurt. Please see the Cleveland Browns for details. But 3 for 3, guys. I think we've set the standard in near misses. And like I say, an unintended characteristic of this pod has been, would you change it? For me, no, I think there's something about that 4 appearances from the Buffalo Bills just that absolutely sits within NFL folklore now, like Jamarcus Russell, like Greatest Show on Turf, all the things we've ended up touching on. So no, I think there's something beautifully poetic just the way it is. So as mini pods go, gents, I think we've nailed it. NFL news, we mentioned we would swing back round to. And the big NFL news is that DeAndre Hopkins may be costing the Cardinals games next season by not being vaccinated against a deadly disease. Again, not a topic I think this podcast needs to venture into. Let's just leave that one there. And in other news, I mean, probably one of the most exciting wide receivers of his generation is going to miss another season or most of the season injured, with Michael Thomas at the Saints not being due back for competitive action till what they're saying, some outlets saying end of October, others saying it might be later and into November. And you know what? I hope that Michael Thomas post these injuries gets back to the Michael Thomas we saw. There are so many great NFL wide receivers through history, NFL running backs, quarterbacks, I mean, you name it actually, who hit the heights and then through injury and through sometimes just a bit of misfortune never find their way back. I think the Saints season looks much harder without him, but let's hope that there aren't, it's already a few, isn't there? But let's hope there aren't many more stories of significant and serious injuries to the superstars we love watching on the weeks ahead. Any other big news that caught your eye, gentlemen, from an NFL perspective?
I think the only thing that I would maybe reference here is just obviously the situation in Green Bay. Because they came out, or news came out this week that the Packers had tried offering Aaron Rodgers additional contracts with more money that Aaron Rodgers flat out declined. And I think kind of leading into this narrative of the Aaron Rodgers situation is not going to be solved by money. This is he wants things now that maybe the Packers aren't going to be able to deliver. And maybe we are looking at a situation where Aaron Rodgers is playing football in a different uniform for a different team, but also tying into the fact that the Packers have also broken off contract negotiations with Devontae Adams. And then you just got to think, well, hang on a minute, you take Rodgers off that team and you take Adams off that team. And all of a sudden, to me at least, the Packers don't look like that big threat that they used to look at before. And then you kind of got to think, well, maybe this is going to be an opportunity for somebody like the Vikings to really step up and make a push to kind of say that they're the kings in the north.
It's almost unthinkable, isn't it, really? I think when we first saw, Rodgers holding out at the start of the off-season, all the talk that came out, I think we all thought, they'll sort it out. He'll get more money or something else. But I find it hard to see where to go, where they're going to go with it. It's not about money. So what's it about? What can they do to get him back? And as for the GM, if you're kind of losing your star quarterback, one of the top 5 in the NFL, potentially all time, that's obviously a debate for another time, and you're losing your number 1 wide receiver, who's probably top 10, top 5 in the league at present. I don't think many GMs can lose those 2 players and then stand to keep their job. I think if you're losing both of those because they're unhappy, you're doing something wrong. And it's almost unthinkable to think of him playing somewhere else, but you kind of think, well, how else is the situation going to be resolved?
See, the funny thing is, I agreed with all of your points until your conclusion. I think actually Brian Gutekunst is helped by the noise. I think fans are just going to be sick of Aaron Rodgers and the prima donna antics, and I'll go and host Jeopardy. Just brace yourself. Just take a breath and think about, what this guy has been saying. I actually think that Packers fans would absolutely appreciate if they started next season with Jordan Love, would it be under center? I suppose probably the most likely, depending on who Rodgers was traded to and who he may be traded for. But I actually think the fan base, that the more noise comes from Rodgers and the players around Rodgers, I actually think the more sympathetic the fan base becomes, particularly in Green Bay. You look at New York sports fans, LA sports fans, they are awash with competitive franchises. Green Bay have the Packers. They are a city without the population size, really to have an NFL franchise in a lot of ways. But yet the Packers are this unique, historically relevant franchise that almost acts as the spine of the NFL, play such an important role in the NFL story and its history. I actually think Gutekunst is in a great position because the more noise there is, the more tolerant and more patient that fan base become. I also think, come on, they were one foolish defensive play before half-time away from giving themselves a better chance of being in the Super Bowl. Let's not pretend this is a team that can't do good things. It's a bit like the Seahawks, I think the Seahawks are another one that I know Russell Wilson ended up staying and all the noise ultimately came to naught. But the world can start to look a lot different when players are on the field playing football. Part of me feels like maybe it's COVID, maybe it's just the way the cards were kind of dealt this off-season, but we haven't really ended up with the big blockbuster move that it kind of felt like we were due, halfway through.
It's still bubbling away, though, I think. Rumours in the last couple of days of Watson, a high chance of Watson being traded to the Eagles. And the Eagles have got, I think 3 first-round picks. They've got the picks to trade. They've not got a stellar quarterback room. Jalen Hurts looked reasonably good in his couple of games last year. Behind him, they've just got Flacco, who I think, is a Super Bowl winner. So let's not, do him a disservice. But I think he's a backup in the league. These days, he didn't really do much for the Jets. So no one would do much for the Jets over the last couple of years, but he didn't do too much in Darnold's absence last year. So there's a potential fit there. If he goes there, does he play? That's a decision for legal minds above ours. But I still think there's that potential for that blockbuster trade that's bubbling away that could still happen with these, Rodgers and Watson situations.
Yeah, I think interesting to see how patient Texans is another one. How patient, the fans would be
I think, I'm kind of with you on all of that. The only other bit of news that I thought was interesting was Fred Warner yesterday. And that mega deal makes him the highest paid inside linebacker in the NFL. And I don't disagree with that. I think Fred Warner's incredible. I think it, as a Colts fan, it sets the bar for where we're looking at Darius Leonard probably next year in terms of the contract, over the next 12 months when we work that out. But I think that mega deal's interesting. I think if you break down how that deal works out, that's interesting as well. It effectively becomes like two deals almost, with a 3-year contract, a 5-year contract that voids after 3, that they can then buy back the second 2. It's very clever structuring effectively, but it's like $95 million to Fred Warner. So I think that just sets another interesting high bar for another position that we're frequently seeing. And I think
I think you're right. It sets the bar for Leonard with the Colts, and then that will set the bar again. And I can only see Devin White at the Bucks going higher than that as well. So it's, sure. I think you're right. We're now going to start to see that linebacker position go up and up.
And I think the only other thing that ties in with that is apparently the Seahawks are prepared to make Jamal Adams the highest paid safety in the league. Now, that is a slightly more contentious one for me. I think his argument is he kind of plays hybrid of safety and linebacker. And I'll be honest, I think he does a better job of linebacker than he does of safety, because I've not seen him catch the ball, even when it's thrown at his hands. But that's an interesting one for me, and how that shakes down. Again, I find some of the decisions at the Seahawks organization odd, but ultimately I think they've given the farm away to get Jamal Adams from the Jets in terms of the picks they gave away. So I think they're already locked in. So I don't think that's a surprise, but I just thought those were interesting deals, and how they shake down in the next couple of weeks, and whether Jamal Adams does get another deal will be interesting.
It's amazing. I mean, we talk about, failed GMs and the problems these GMs have at times, and we're very harsh on the ones that aren't ultimately bringing talent into their franchise. But the harsh reality of being a GM is the good GMs are the ones with a quarterback, and the bad GMs are the ones without, right? If you've got a great quarterback, that can absolutely nullify an awful lot of criticism, and the Seahawks still have that great quarterback. It's undoubtedly, the thing that gives them the best chance to win is having Russell Wilson under center. So gents, I'm not sure how mini pod was.
Well, I was just going to say, I being aware of the fact that I was the one that brought up Rodgers and Adams, I think we kind of glossed over maybe one of the more important things in terms of who's going to be playing for the Lombardi in February. Because when we were talking about the Bills, we were talking about how infrequent it is for a team to go back. And we're looking at a Tampa Bay Buccaneers franchise that have brought back almost everybody from last year. They've brought back everybody, all of the starters from last year. And looking at their path, and that Michael Thomas injury is potentially going to have ramifications that are going to reach that far, because you've got no more Drew Brees in New Orleans. You've got no Michael Thomas until sort of the end of October, November. And you've got a question at quarterback. Is it going to be Jameis Winston, or is it going to be Taysom Hill? And whether you believe or buy into the Jameis Winston rehabilitation as a quarterback tour, any quarterback is going to be a better quarterback with Michael Thomas out there, because much like DeAndre Hopkins, who we also mentioned a little bit, if you just get it in his radius, he will come down with the ball and he will make plays for you. You are absolutely a poorer team without him. And is that going to mean the Bucs have got a much, much clearer route to champions of the South, and potentially a much, much easier route to being champions of the NFL?
I think if the Bucs don't win the division, it's not been a successful season. I think it's all, I mean, these words could come back to bite me, but, if you look around, the Falcons have arguably got a bit weaker, losing Julio, and Matt Ryan's another year older. And, the Panthers have now got a new brand new quarterback for the second season in a row, and how long will he take to bed in? And there are question marks around Darnold as well. So, you know, who knows with that? And then obviously the Saints have probably regressed at quarterback, albeit, you know, Jameis is feast or famine. So you never know. He can, you know, sling 30 touchdowns, but obviously we know he's also got 30 picks in his locker as well. So if he's improved that side of his game, then he'll be a decent, you know, a decent quarterback for them. But yeah, missing, as he's affectionately known in Tampa, slant boy for the majority of the season might, you know, is definitely going to make the Saints weaker. So, yeah, I think if we don't win the division, it's been a disappointment.
I only have a few quick points. I think Michael Thomas, a bit like you're saying, isn't really the go up and get it type receiver. So I think Winston still has that. I think Thomas, like you say, is more those inside catches, those short slants and the yards that follow. I'm going to pick up on your description of Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston is a unicorn because he is not feast or famine. He is incredibly both feast and famine. It's not whether he throws 30 touchdowns or whether he throws 30 interceptions. It's the fact he will incredibly do both that makes Jameis Winston so entertaining for me. I don't know. You're talking about Matt Ryan being another year older at the Falcons. I mean, don't look now, Phil. There are a lot of old players who were a year older at the Bucks. So I think if they were to do it again, I mean, I think it's incredible anyway. I think it's incredible what Tom Brady did and many of the players around him did. If they do it again, that would just be, I mean, the rest of the world might as well just give up, I think, if Brady can be that successful in that setup. So yeah, in a world where there's plenty going on, we've somehow managed to put it in a neat little package and tie it in a bow. But gentlemen, thank you for your company. With the oddness of the next few weeks, with some of us on our hollybobs, with us still trying to work out when people might be able to get out of the house, Aldrin, and might have to, you know, come and spend some time in the real world rather than self-isolating. The pod might be Friday next week, might be Saturday, might be Friday the week after or Saturday. But keep an eye out and you'll find us somewhere. And gents, let's do it again in 7 days, shall we?
Cheers, Rob. Stay safe.
Thanks a lot.
This is amazing. Woo!
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game